Lineup of 5 amazing students from across Montreal to give us some very interesting presentations on their research. So I will now welcome Luke, who is from Western University, so actually not from Montreal. He's a software engineering student, and he'll be presenting B.A.I.L.F.F, bias analysis in interactive legal intelligence and fairness framework. So let's give him a warm round of applause.
Imagine 2 defendants walk into the same courtroom. Same facts, same judge, same legal standard. The only difference is a name or a dialect embedded within the case. In a fair legal system, hopefully nothing should change. And for a human judge, we at least have accountability, appeals, oversight, a paper trail. But AI systems are increasingly being evaluated for exactly this kind of work: legal drafting, case outcome support, decision assistance. And unlike a human, when AI is biased, it doesn't hesitate or second guess. So we can't assume fairness. We have to test it. And that's why my team at Western AI built B.A.I.L.F.F, Bias Analysis and Interactive Legal Intelligence and Fairness Framework. So most fairness audits in AI ask one question: does the model produce a biased output? But legal proceedings are not a single output. They're a process: adversarial, dynamic, and procedural. So what we did was we built a mock courtroom with 3 different AI agents, a judge, a prosecution, and a defense. And then we ran paired trials with identical facts, only the demographic queue toggled. And then we measured not just the verdict, but everything that happened on the way to that. So here's what we found. In several cases, the non-white defendant queues actually produced lower conviction rates. And at first glance, that somewhat looks like progress. But when we looked at the process, the picture actually reversed. So those same defendants had their defense agents interrupted more often, they received fewer favorable rulings on objections, and their defense was given less speaking time throughout the entire trial. So the system was performing fairness at the verdict level while quietly undermining it everywhere else. And what we call this is fairness veneer, and it's exactly what you can't catch by looking at outcomes alone. So think about what that means. An AI judge that acquits a defendant to satisfy a fairness constraint is not adjudicating facts, it's managing appearances. And that's just as much a failure of justice as a wrongful conviction. And there's a second signal that makes this even more urgent. Even when the average conviction rates look similar across conditions, verdict flip rates, so how often a Q swap alone would reverse the outcome, remains between 15 and 40% across different model families. So that average looks stable, but the individual cases are not. And in law, that gap is not acceptable. So our conclusion is practical and urgent. Legal AI is not a hypothetical. And what B.A.I.L.F.F shows is that the standard we've been using for typical LLM evals, check the output, check the verdict, move on, is not enough for legal systems. A system that can pass every top-line fairness metric and still conduct an unequal trial, it can acquit more often and interrupt more often, it can look equitable in the data and feel unjust in the room. So if we're serious about deploying AI in legal settings and speeding up workflows, we need a new standard. Audit it like a courtroom. Test outcomes and process, because the question was never just whether AI can reach a fair verdict. The question is whether AI can conduct a fair trial. And until we build the tools to test that rigorously, that question remains open. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So do we have any questions for Luke? I saw a potential hand over there. Oh, yeah, sure.
Thank you so much. That was a great talk. I wanted to know about the different kinds of biases. I wasn't sure if I understood. Was it only like a ethnicity bias? Were there like different kinds of biases?
Yeah, so we had ethnicity cues, we had gender cues, we had like dialect cues as well. So if they had a French accent, if they had an English accent, if they had a maybe Caribbean accent. But obviously, like those are a lot of things to test on a lot of different models. So we kind of aggregated a lot of those results, but definitely future work would be going deeper into every single one.
There's another question right there, actually.
I missed the beginning a bit, but do you think the results could change if you use a different AI model, if you pre-train the AI models?
Like yes and no. I think a big constraint that we had is we were kind of limited to just open source models because we kind of wanted to know what happened under the hood, and we wanted to be able to have like consistent results because if you use like ChatGPT or Claude via the API, they could change something and we wouldn't be able to know. But I definitely do think like we have some signal that if we were using bigger models, like we mainly tested smaller models, that they were a little bit more consistent and the flip rates were lower.
Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. We'll now pass on to our second student. So Jiaxi's son, who is a neuroscience student at McGill University, and she'll be presenting When Genes Meet Brain Networks, Rethinking Risk in Mental Health. So welcome.
Imagine two siblings growing up in a very similar environment. One of them developed severe depression in their early 20s, while the other does not. Why does this happen? Well, part of the reason may lie into our DNA. DNA is the biological code we inherit from our parents. Within that code, there are thousands of small genetic variations. For complex psychiatric conditions such as schizophrenia or depression, no single gene determines the outcome. Instead, risk is distributed across many genetic variations that each of them contribute to a very small effect. When we combine all those effects, we can estimate something called polygenic risk score, which is a summary measurement of an individual's overall genetic vulnerability. At the same time, the brain does not function as an isolated region that works alone. It operates as an interconnected network. Parts of the brain region communicate with each other to support our memory, attention, and internal thoughts. Disruption of this large-scale connectivity has been observed in many different psychiatric conditions. And now here's the question. How does genetic risk distribution relate to brain network connectivity? In my research, I examined whether variation in polygenic risk is associated with variation in brain network communication. Instead of focusing on a single gene or a single brain region, this work investigated patterns, asking whether an individual with higher polygenic risk shows systematic significant difference in their brain network communication. Although this work does not claim causation, identifying a reliable link between genetic liability and brain network connectivity bridges two major levels of explanation in mental health research: genes and nervous system. Returning to our original question, how come two individuals with similar background end up with different mental health outcome? Well, I think the reason may lie into how those small genetic differences secretly relate to our brain network communication. Digging into this question may not give us a single cause of mental health issue, but it does bring us closer to understand how biological risk is related and expressed in the system that shapes our thought, feel, and experience of the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was great. Do we have any questions? Yep, there's a question over there.
Hi, that was great. Thank you so much. So you're talking about how people who have the same genetic makeup could have a different outcome in terms of like psychiatric conditions. So are you suggesting that it would be because of different like functional communication in the brain? Is that the idea?
Yeah, well, we're testing the association because we cannot still claim it's a causal relationship, but at least there is suggested statistical variation that we can see and statistical difference we can tell from our analysis. That there must be something happening, but is that a causation? Is still unknown. We are working on it.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Do we have one more question? Yeah, here.
Hi. You were talking about schizophrenia and depression as mental health disorders, but were there any other disorders that you also looked at when doing this research?
Well, these are just two examples. Actually, we test several others. For example, we have bipolar disorders, and we have, it doesn't come up to my mind, but there are several others. So it's actually like not on a single disease, or like as I said before, not on a single gene. So like overall, we want to see how their patterns like exist.
Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. I am now very happy to welcome Naya, who is a cognitive science student at McGill University. And she'll be presenting her 3-minute thesis called Feeds of Freedom, Social Media, Transitional Space, and the Experience of Comfort. So welcome, Naya.
Thank you. I want to begin by asking, where is your algorithm? Is it in your phone? Is it in a server room somewhere in Illinois? When you scroll, you might feel a sense of lightness, of buoyancy, maybe even freedom. But freedom, lightness, I mean, look at yourself. Eyes fixed to your phone, unblinking, thumb caressing your screen, back hunched, cradled. You are stuck, and I wish you would look at yourself because you often cannot. You forget yourself in your hypnosis. Unblinking, caressing, cradled. You are back to being an infant who cannot distinguish themselves from their mother's embrace. For Donald Winnicott, early childhood begins with enmeshment, where the infant cannot recognize the mother as an external thing. The world seems to be completely in sync with the infant's inner world. Inevitably, the mother cannot meet the needs of the child perfectly, and the child begins the process of disillusionment, of recognizing the mother as something external. This is very hard on the baby. So the infant relies on something like a stuffed toy, a transitional object that lies between the external and internal world of the child. So where is your algorithm? According to over 40 interviews and scrolling sessions, what you experience as an algorithm exists in a transitional space that helps you soothe and helps you cope with the impoverished reality that you are in. But it is more complicated than that, because there is a you in the algorithm and an algorithm in you. And the algorithm in you sees the you in the algorithm tuning and retuning to each other, oscillating between falling out of sync and sinking into each other. And this parallels mechanisms found in flow, limerence, play, and hypnosis, orchestrating a coincidence between attention, or the way it alters your attention, compulsion, and uncertainty in order to release you. And release you from what? Because you are absolutely shackled to it. So what you might experience as feeds of freedom is in reality closer to the sense of comfort from being held and cradled as an infant. And this cannot, and this, I got nervous. This structure or this feeling cannot be inseparable from the structure that sustains it. Thank you. Any questions?
That was awesome. Do we have any questions for Naya? Yeah, there's already a question.
Thank you very much for your talk. It would make me have a little existential crisis. But yeah, I understand that how the algorithm and the person is mutually related. And I was wondering, do you think also like some factors such as like loneliness or like the environment could also affect more precisely the addiction to like scrolling or like social media?
Yes, absolutely. I think in general, transitional objects or spaces help you cope with reality the same way like the infant might get stressed from not having like food on time. With like the introduction of delays and absences, the transitional object can fill the gap for that. In the same way, social media can fill the gap for loneliness and a lot of the problems we have in the world right now.
Thank you.
Dr. Morris here has a question, so we'll pass it on to him.
Thanks. This is really brilliant, bringing Winnicott into. I think this is a very striking and original thought. And I'm just also thinking about attention, because it also seems to me you're sort of flipping possibly the usual idea of attention capture being a terrible problem with these scrolling systems and so on. But I think you're saying having your attention captured so it doesn't need to be focusing on the anxiety-inducing things is part of the point? Is this part of what you're thinking?
There's definitely part of that. I think what I was more inspired by is Dorothy Tenoff's book on limerence, which is kind of when you have like an obsessive crush, love at first sight kind of thing. And when she describes the course of limerence, there are also, well, it's not exactly in her book, but there are also studies about like what the science behind this obsession is. And a lot of it comes from like altered attention. For example, if you have a predisposition to ADHD, and also a predisposition to obsessive compulsive disorder, just like compulsions in general. And you create these fantasies in your head that could like lead to these obsessions with people, with crushes. And I'm not saying you are limerent or in love with your feed, but the same mechanisms that are orienting you, tunneling your attention, putting you in hypnosis. Freud also talks about this in Love and Hypnosis with, I guess it could be translated to like tunneling your attention. But these mechanisms seem to like let this feeling of comfort emerge from them.
Thank you so much, Naya.
Thank you.
I will now welcome Isabelle to the stage, who is a student at the Université de Montréal in neuroscience, and she will be presenting her talk in French. La rechute après consommation de cocaïne, rôle des projections Cortex, Prélimbique, Noyau, Accumbens. Welcome, Isabelle.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Isabelle Perin et j'aimerais commencer en vous demandant de mettre en scène dans la vie d'un toxicomane. Imaginez, vous êtes très heureux, vous avez finalement réussi à être en abstinence après une longue période de consommation de drogue. Et vous décidez d'accompagner vos amis dans un festival de musique. Par contre, vous n'attendiez pas, et c'est que juste être dans ce festival de musique, vous preniez de la drogue avant, va vous engendrer un craving immense pour la consommation de la drogue. En laboratoire, nous appelons cela des stimuli discriminatifs. Et encore aujourd'hui, nous ne savons pas spécialement quelle est l'influence de ces stimuli discriminatifs dans la rechute, où est-ce qu'ils vont agir au niveau du cerveau. Nous avons des pistes par contre. Dans la littérature, c'est noté que l'inhibition des projections du cortex prélimbique à la partie core du noyau accumbens diminue la rechute déclenchée par des stimuli conditionnés, que eux sont causés par l'effet pharmacologique de la drogue. Nous nous sommes demandé alors, est-ce que si on va inhiber ce circuit-là, ça peut bloquer la rechute induite par les stimuli discriminatifs? Comme on a fait une procédure de taux d'administration en accès intermittent de la cocaïne chez les rats. En effet, pendant 4 heures, nous disponibilisons pendant 5 minutes une lumière qui indique la présence de cocaïne, où le rat peut consommer combien de cocaïne qu'il le veut. Et c'est suivi par 25 minutes de déhaissement, c'est une autre lumière qui indique qu'il y a plus de cocaïne, que les rats ne peuvent plus consommer. Et nous allons nous intéresser, premièrement, si c'est vraiment vrai que les stimuli discriminatifs positifs vont induire cette consommation de drogue. Et c'est le cas. On a vu que les rats, à la fin de la session, consomment presque que en période DS+, et ce, principalement à la première minute de cette période DS+. Après, nous soumettons les rats à 5 semaines d'abstinence forcée, où ils sont dans leur cage, sans accès aux drogues et sans stimuli associés à la prise de drogue, et nous faisons des chirurgies dans lesquelles nous allons insérer les récepteurs inhibiteurs de la catégorie des DREAD dans la synapse entre le cortex prélimbique et le noyau Accumbens score. Et finalement, nous procédons à des tests de rechute dans lesquels nous séparons les rats en 2 groupes. Un groupe dans lequel nous injectons de l'ACSF au niveau de ces récepteurs, au niveau du noyau Accumbens score, et dans d'autres rats où on va injecter du CNO, que lui va agir sur ces récepteurs et finalement inhiber ce circuit. Et on se dit, probablement, les rats dans lesquels nous aurons cette inhibition, elles ne vont plus aller faire cette recherche de cocaïne comme les rats de contrôle. On a clairement un effet beaucoup plus grand des stimuli discriminatifs pour les deux types de rats. Les rats de contrôle et les rats avec le circuit inhibé vont toujours chercher beaucoup plus de cocaïne lorsque nous avons la lumière du DS+ allumée. Par contre, on n'a pas une différence significative entre les 2 groupes. Ce qu'on a par contre, c'est que les rats dans lesquels on a une inhibition, elles ont beaucoup plus tendance à perdre la motivation de chercher la cocaïne alors qu'elle n'est plus là. Ce que ça nous indique, c'est la puissance de ces stimuli discriminatifs dans la rechute et probablement qu'ils sont mobilisés dans plusieurs circuits différents, d'où l'importance de les étudier encore plus. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much. Do we have any questions? Yes, I see a question here. Is there a mic?
Merci beaucoup pour ta présentation, c'était vraiment super. Moi, j'avais une question un peu plus par rapport à les retombées pratiques. Tu sais, souvent, quand les gens ils sortent, par exemple, là, d'une institution de rehab, on va dire, on leur donne souvent le conseil comme, tu sais, fais attention à quel environnement dans lequel tu reviens, tu sais, comme, essaye de ne pas traîner avec des gens que tu sais qui consomment, de ne pas retourner avec la même gang qu'avant. Est-ce que si les gens retournent dans le même environnement, selon vous, ça ferait en sorte qu'au final, ils sont quasiment comme destinés à avoir des pulsions de rechute en quelque sorte?
Oui, effectivement, c'est le cas. On s'est basé beaucoup sur la littérature qui dit qu'effectivement, dans les rats et chez les humains, ces stimuli discriminatifs, dans le contexte de la disponibilité de la drogue, ils influencent beaucoup, ils peuvent induire la rechute. Et ce que nos résultats indiquent effectivement, qu'au moins chez les rats, c'est absolument sûr que ces stimuli discriminatifs positifs, ils vont induire la rechute. Et même si nous faisons la recherche chez les rats, nous avons fait tous les efforts pour rendre cette expérience le plus valable écologiquement possible, notamment par notre accès intermittent, qui est plus représentatif de la prise de drogue chez les personnes que les tests antérieurs qui étaient faits sur du long accès.
Do we have another question? Oh, there's another question right here. Third row.
Je m'excuse d'abord parce que je vais avoir besoin de plusieurs anglicismes pour demander ma question, mais merci pour la présentation. Je ne sais pas si le même phénomène est observé dans l'étude de l'addiction de la cocaïne. Je sais que, mais dans le domaine de la recherche de la nicotine, on parle de personnalités de rats, goal tracking and sign tracking. Et bon, pour ceux qui ne sont pas familiers, c'est simplement que est-ce que tu vas avoir une réponse dopaminergique à la substance ou à ce qui précède la substance, les rituels associés avec? Et je suis curieux, dans votre étude, si vous avez examiné les personnalités de rats, on peut dire, et s'il y a des résultats différents.
Si, effectivement, on l'a fait. On n'a pas présenté parce que c'est quand même des grands résultats à présenter. On l'a fait, c'est la première expérience qu'on a faite. C'est justement séparer les rats en sign tracking, goal tracking. C'est les phénotypes d'approche conditionnée pavlovienne. Ce qu'on a vu, c'est que ça fait longtemps que dans le laboratoire, à chaque fois qu'on fait des expériences d'addiction de la drogue, on fait systématiquement partager les rats en goal tracking et sign tracking, mais on ne trouve jamais d'effet. Et c'était le cas, justement, ce qui est assez bizarre, qu'on considérant que toute la littérature indique qu'on a des effets, au ce sens-là, nous, on n'a trouvé aucune corrélation entre être soit goal tracker ou sign tracker dans le comportement addictif. Mais toute la littérature l'indique, alors c'est à voir.
Incroyable. Merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Merci beaucoup.
I will now present our last 3MT presenter of the day, Sofiia, who is a cognitive science student at McGill University, and she'll be presenting her talk titled Age-Related Differences in Effort-Based Decision-Making for Prosocial and Self-Oriented Rewards. Sofiia, welcome to the stage.
Imagine this. You've had a really long day. Your energy is low and you're tired. And now someone offers you a choice. Press this key 70 times. And if you do, you'll earn money. Or charity will. No one is watching. No one will judge you. What do you choose? That simple question captures something fundamental about human motivation. Every day we make decisions. Is the reward worth the cost? Psychologists call this effort-based decision-making, weighing that effort against the value. Across the lifespan, people tend to avoid high-effort tasks. But here's what we didn't know. Does that calculation change with age? As we get older, do we become less motivated, or do we become motivated in a different way? To answer this, our lab tested 142 adults, 90 adults between 18 and 35, and 52 over 60. Each person completed 120 trials. And on every trial, they decided, will I exert effort rapidly by pressing a key for myself or for a charity? And the efforts ranged from easy to truly exhausting, and the rewards increased in size. Now, you might predict something intuitive. Older adults have less physical stamina, so they should avoid high effort, right? But that's not what happened. Younger adults were generally cautious. They avoided high effort trials. And interestingly, they showed no real difference between working for themselves or for charity. But older adults, the harder the task became, the more willing they were to work for others. At high effort levels, older adults chose to choose the charity option significantly more than the money option. Let that sink in. When effort was highest, they shifted towards prosocial rewards. So what explains this? It turns out aging is not just a story of decline. It's a story of motivational reorientation. According to socio-emotional selectivity theory, as people perceive their future time as limited, their goals tend to shift. When our time left feels kind of irrelevant, like it often does in our youth, we prioritize that exploration, achievement, and information seeking. But when time feels finite, we prioritize meaning, connection, and emotional significance. In our study, older adults were more sensitive to rewards overall, but especially when those rewards benefited others. And computational modeling further showed that younger adults showed greater effort bias and the tendency to avoid that effort. They were also less sensitive to increasing rewards. Older adults, in contrast, required less incentive to change in effortful behavior. Their drive wasn't lower, it was just redirected towards contribution and towards impact. And this really matters because our society often frames aging as decline, less productivity, less ambition, but our findings suggest something radically different. Older adulthood may represent that peak in prosocial motivation, a stage of life where effort becomes more meaningful when it helps someone else. This has powerful implications. If we want to promote physical activity in older adults, maybe we shouldn't emphasize personal fitness goals. Maybe we frame it as staying healthy to support their family. If we want to increase community engagement, maybe we highlight impact and not incentives. Because in later life, the strongest reward may not be money, and it may be meaning. So I'll leave you with this. If effort is the currency of action, what we choose to spend it on reveals what we value most. And across the lifespan, what we value transforms. When time feels infinite, we invest in ourselves. But when time feels finite, we invest in others. And maybe the real story of aging is not about losing motivation, but about discovering what was worth the effort all along. Thank you.
Thank you, Sofiia. So do we have any questions for Sofiia? We've got a question here. There was a question here in the front, third row.
Thank you so much for that talk. That was super great. I was wondering if you know, or if you guys found any difference in the older age group, like as they got older, between like I think you said 50 and I don't remember the older age, but
Yeah.
like, did you notice a difference kind of in that age group?
Specifically with how much effort they were exerting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we tested adults over 60 years old, and a lot of them actually had first-degree family history of Alzheimer's disease. So that's something that we're currently investigating too, if there's any kind of neural correlates that have the potential of affecting this decision-making process that they make. But what we noticed is that the older adults, they were much more likely to kind of do more button presses for the rewards that were going to be donated to a charity rather than for themselves, where we didn't see that kind of impact with younger adults.
Mm-hmm. But did you notice that more as the older age group got older? Like, was there
No,
a
I think
trend
the difference was pretty consistent just within the age group. Anything
Okay.
over 60, nothing in like a specific age range.
Cool. Thank you.
We had another question back here.
I'm wondering if you think the results might be confounded by measuring it right now. Do you think if we did the study, let's say 50 years ago, before, you know, social media and all the short form content that we're consuming, there might be different results, or what do you make of it?
Yeah, no, that's a great question to consider. I think the fact that this study is so recent and it was with older adults, it was done in the past 2 years. With the younger adults, we just conducted this over the past summer. So there's definitely the influence of social media and kind of AI and technology advances to consider. But perhaps if this was conducted earlier on, we wouldn't have seen such a low kind of motivational aspect from younger adults. I think we definitely would see, as from my predictions, we would see something a lot more similar to the older generation, perhaps not as much difference in the prosociality of it, but I think there would be a more kind of significant difference between effort exertion overall.